Julia Roberts stopped mid-sentence. She looked at the old letter. And America's most famous smile disappeared into complete silence. It was a Tuesday night in October 2019. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Studios 6A at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Julia Roberts was there to promote her latest film, another press tour, another late-night appearance, another round of charming stories and infectious laughter that had made her one of Hollywood's most beloved stars for 3 decades. Everything was going perfectly. Jimmy had opened with his monologue. The audience was energized. The roots were on point. Julia walked out to thunderous applause wearing an elegant dress, that signature smile lighting up the entire studio. They'd been talking for maybe 5 minutes. Jimmy asked about her kids. She told a funny story about her daughter. The audience laughed. It was textbook late-night television, warm, entertaining, effortless. And then someone in the front row stood up. An elderly woman. Maybe 75, maybe 80. Dressed simply. Nothing flashy. She had something in her hand, a piece of paper, yellowed with age, folded carefully. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice trembling but determined. "Miss Roberts? I need to give you something." Security moved immediately. This wasn't protocol. Audience members didn't interrupt tapings. Jimmy's producer was already signaling to the guards, ready to have the woman escorted out. But Julia had turned in her chair. She'd seen the woman. Seen the paper in her hand. And her face changed. Not the polite television smile. Not the gracious celebrity acknowledgement. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like recognition mixed with confusion. "Wait," Julia said to the security guards, holding up her hand. She looked at Jimmy, then back at the woman. What is that?" The elderly woman stepped closer to the edge of the stage area, still holding the paper. Her hands were shaking. "It's a letter," she said. "From 1989. You wrote it to my granddaughter. Her name was Emily. Emily Patterson." Julia Roberts went completely still. The smile vanished. Her hand moved to her throat. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. Jimmy looked from Julia to the woman and back again. His comedy instincts told him to make a joke, lighten the moment, move on. But something in Julia's expression stopped him cold. "I don't understand," Julia said quietly, her voice barely audible over the studio microphones. "Emily Patterson. That was 30 years ago. 30 years ago this month," the woman confirmed, tears now visible on her weathered cheeks. "October 1989. You met her at a children's hospital in Los Angeles. Cedars-Sinai. You were there filming something, I think. She was 8 years old. Terminal leukemia. 3 weeks left to live." The audience had gone completely silent. Jimmy stood frozen beside his desk, blue cue cards dangling forgotten in his hand. The roots had stopped moving. Every camera in the studio stayed locked on this unfolding moment. Julia's eyes filled with tears. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember Emily." The woman nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then she held up the letter. "You spent 2 hours with her that day. You sat by her hospital bed. You told her stories. You made her laugh. And before you left, she asked you to write her a letter. She said she wanted something to keep. Something to remind her that even in a hospital, beautiful things could still happen. I wrote it on hospital stationery," Julia said, the memory clearly flooding back. "In the nurse's station. I remember the pen barely worked. I had to press so hard." She carried this letter every day for the 3 weeks she had left. The woman continued, her voice breaking. "She made me read it to her every night before bed. Even when she was too weak to open her eyes, she wanted to hear your words. She died holding it." Jimmy Fallon felt tears running down his face. He didn't wipe them away. 300 audience members were crying. The control room had gone silent. Julia stood up slowly from the guest chair. "May I?" She started, then stopped. "May I see it?" The woman climbed the stairs to the stage. Security let her pass. She walked across that famous Tonight Show floor, under those bright lights, and handed Julia Roberts a letter she'd written 3 decades ago to a dying child. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Julia took the letter with trembling hands. The paper was indeed yellowed, creased from being folded and unfolded countless times, the edges soft from years of careful handling. She unfolded it slowly. Her own handwriting stared back at her. 21-year-old Julia Roberts, just beginning her career, before Pretty Woman would make her a superstar, writing to a little girl who would never grow up. She read it silently, her lips moving slightly. Tears streamed down her face, dropping onto the old paper. When she finished, she looked up at the woman, Emily's grandmother. "I didn't know she died," Julia said, her voice cracking. "I went back to the hospital 2 weeks later to visit her again. They told me she'd been discharged. I thought maybe she'd gotten better. I thought maybe there had been a miracle." The grandmother shook her head gently. "There was a miracle. Just not the kind you hoped for. You gave her joy in her final days. You made her feel special. You made her feel seen. That was the miracle." Julia pressed the letter to her chest, over her heart, sobbing openly now. Jimmy walked over, put his arm around her shoulder. Not as a host, but as a human being witnessing profound grief and love colliding on his stage. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. They chose silence, giving this moment the reverence it deserved. To understand what happened next, you need to understand October 1989. Julia Roberts wasn't Julia Roberts yet. She was a 21-year-old actress with a few small roles, living in Los Angeles, auditioning constantly, hoping for her big break. She'd been cast in a small independent film that was shooting some scenes at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. During a break in filming, she'd wandered into the pediatric wing. Not for any particular reason. Just restless energy between takes. She'd walked past the children's cancer ward and seen a little girl in one of the rooms, bald from chemotherapy, surrounded by stuffed animals, watching Sesame Street on a small TV. Something made Julia stop. Maybe it was the way the girl was sitting. So small in that big hospital bed. Maybe it was the balloons tied to the bed rail that said, "Get well soon," even though everyone knew she wouldn't. Julia had knocked on the door frame. "Hi. I'm Julia. Is it okay if I come in?" The little girl, Emily, had looked up with huge eyes. "Are you an actress?" "I'm trying to be," Julia had said with a smile. "But mostly I'm just someone who saw you from the hallway and thought you looked like you might want some company." Emily's grandmother had been there too, sitting in the corner chair, keeping vigil like she did every day. She'd started to object. This was her granddaughter's final days, not time for random visitors, but something about this young woman's genuine warmth made her pause. Julia had sat on the edge of Emily's bed. They talked about everything. Movies. School. Emily's stuffed animal collection. Julia's auditions. Emily had told Julia about the movie she wanted to make someday. A story about a princess who didn't need saving because she could save herself. "That's a good movie," Julia had said. "Someone should make that." "Will you make it?" Emily had asked. "When you're a famous actress?" Julia had laughed. "I'm not going to be famous. But if I ever get the chance, I'll remember your idea." They'd spent 2 hours together. When Julia finally had to leave, the production assistant was calling for her. Emily had asked for one thing. "Will you write me a letter?" "So I can remember today?" Julia had found paper in the nurse's station. A pen that barely worked. And she'd written Emily Patterson a letter about dreams and princesses and how being brave doesn't mean not being scared, it means being scared and doing the thing anyway. She'd given it to Emily's grandmother to deliver. And then she'd gone back to the set, finished filming, moved on with her life. 6 months later, Pretty Woman came out. Julia Roberts became one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Her life transformed overnight. The memory of Emily Patterson faded, not forgotten, but buried under the avalanche of fame and work and the relentless pace of sudden stardom. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Jimmy looked at his producer in the control room through the camera. He could see Bobby in the monitor, frantically trying to figure out what to do. Cut to commercial? Keep rolling? This wasn't in the script. This was pure chaos. Jimmy made the decision. He looked directly at camera one. "Folks," he said, addressing both the studio audience and everyone watching at home, "I know this isn't what you expected tonight. This isn't a comedy bit. This isn't planned. This is real. And I think we need to honor it." He turned to Julia and Emily's grandmother, still standing together on the stage, the letter between them. "Julia," Jimmy said gently, Would you read it? Read what you wrote to Emily?" Julia looked at him, eyes red, mascara streaked. "On television?" "She carried it every day for 3 weeks," Jimmy said. "Maybe the world should hear what gave her so much comfort." Julia looked at the grandmother, who nodded through her tears. "She would have wanted that. She'd be so proud that you remembered her." Julia unfolded the letter again. Her hands were shaking so badly that Jimmy stepped closer and held up a microphone for her, his other hand steady on her shoulder. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Julia began to read. Her voice cracked on almost every word, but she pushed through. "Dear Emily, today I met a princess. She didn't wear a crown, and she wasn't in a castle, but I knew she was a princess anyway because she had the most important thing, courage. You told me you're scared. That's okay. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you keep smiling anyway. You keep loving your family. You keep watching your favorite shows. You keep being you even when it's hard. I'm scared too, Emily. I'm scared I'm not good enough. I'm scared I'll fail. I'm scared nobody will remember me. But today you taught me something. It's not about being remembered by everyone. It's about being unforgettable to someone. And you, Emily Patterson, are absolutely unforgettable to me. You asked me to make your movie someday, the one about the princess who saves herself. I promise I will try. And when I do, I'll remember the girl who gave me the idea. The bravest person I ever met. Keep being a princess. Keep being brave. And know that somewhere out there, there's an actress who believes in you and thinks you're absolutely magical. Love, Julia. By the time Julia finished, there wasn't a dry eye in Studio 6A. The audience was standing, not applauding yet, just standing in reverent acknowledgement. The Roots had tears streaming down their faces. Questlove had his head in his hands. Jimmy pulled off his suit jacket and draped it around Julia's shoulders, a gesture of protection, of humanity. He turned to Emily's grandmother. "Why did you wait 30 years? He asked. "Why bring this now?" The grandmother smiled through her tears. "Because Emily made me promise something before she died," she said. "When Julia becomes famous, really famous, I want you to find her and tell her thank you. Tell her she made my last days beautiful. Tell her she kept her promise about being brave." Julia fell to her knees, still clutching the letter. Jimmy knelt beside her, holding her while she cried. The grandmother knelt too, and the three of them stayed there on the Tonight Show stage, under the bright lights, while cameras broadcast this moment of pure human connection to millions. After several minutes, Julia stood. She looked at the letter one more time, then did something that would define this moment forever. She walked to Jimmy's desk, opened the top drawer, and placed the letter inside. "This stays here," she said firmly, her voice stronger now. "In this studio. Where Emily's story was finally told. Where her bravery was honored." Jimmy nodded, understanding. "It'll be safe here. I promise." Julia turned to the audience, wiping her eyes. "Emily wanted me to make a movie about a princess who saves herself. I never did. But I'm going to now. And every penny of profit goes to pediatric cancer research. In Emily Patterson's name. The studio erupted. Standing ovation. Tears and applause mixing together. The grandmother embraced Julia, whispering thank you over and over. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The letter stayed in Jimmy's desk drawer for 3 years. Then Julia had it preserved and donated to the Children's Hospital Los Angeles with a plaque. Emily Patterson, the Bravest Princess, 1981 to 1989. The film was made. It premiered in 2022. Julia dedicated it to the little girl who taught me what courage really means. And every October, Jimmy Fallon opens his desk drawer and remembers the night television stopped pretending.